sometimes I think the problem with the book is actually your expectations going in, and sometimes when you read a book you don't know what your expectations were until you finish the book and it has just failed to meet them. This is the problem perhaps with this book. This is London Fog by Corton, published in 2015, and I'm going to do a little review of it today. So welcome back to the channel. If you'd like to see more videos like this, then do please subscribe. So London Fog London has been associated with fog in people's imagination and also in popular culture for quite a long time, but they became so much worse after the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, and these fogs were yellow and thick and dirty and polluted, and often referred to as pea soupers, like as thick and as yellow as pea soup. And so this is what this book is about. So I have bought a book about fog, or actually I did request this book to be bought for me as a Christmas present, and it's a book about fog, so potentially I may just be a very boring person. But I do think some of these seemingly quite dull, boring topics are actually kind of ripe for an entertaining review. When I was younger, I did once go to a sample lecture at a university open day on pedestrian crossings, and it was actually really interesting, and you may just have to take my word for that. But now I really want to read a book on the history of pedestrian crossings. If such a thing exists, it is on my wish list. I just need to find the book. But anyway, I thought the book London Fog, a biography, or the biography, I thought this could potentially be quite interesting. I think what I wanted from this book was a book about fog, obviously, but specific to London and historical. So from 19th century is where the bulk of the book is focused. A little bit perhaps on the science of fogs, but about how the fogs impact people's lives, how fog has been represented in popular culture, in literature, in art and so on, and also the language used around how we talk about London fog as a particular concept. And that is kind of what the book gives you, but it's kind of meh. The book doesn't really have an introduction. It doesn't have an introductory paragraph on each of the chapters either, and it actually doesn't really have much of a conclusion, to be honest. I have to say that in previous books, when I've read like the introduction or the start of the chapter, which is kind of introducing, now this is what the chapter's about, I have got a bit frustrated. I'm like, stop telling me what you're going to tell me and just tell me it. But this book, I think, perhaps needed that introduction, and the chapters needed to be more clearly defined as to what they were actually going to be about, because I didn't really understand why the author had written the book and why each individual chapter kind of existed and what I was supposed to get from each of those chapters. And I think it does sometimes really help to understand what the author was trying to get across and what the point of the book and the chapters are for your appreciation and understanding of them. Sometimes that can really make a difference as to how much you actually like the experience of reading it and also what you get out of it afterwards. So the chapters have like some interesting titles, like King Fog and The Land of the Living Dead and The Last Gasp, which are quite kind of eye-catching titles, and you know, but it's not super clear what each of the chapters is supposed to be about. At least it wasn't for me anyway. The first chapter, which sort of stands in for a real introduction, kind of discusses the language used around fog and London fog in particular. So what is London fog? In fact, I think that is what the chapter is called, which does make sense. Oh no, the birth of London fog is what it's called, and actually that's kind of an odd chapter title. I kind of get it, but so it looks a little bit at the sort of science of fog, what is fog and why is London particularly so foggy, and then also what made these fogs so much worse. So the pollution that was coming from industry, but then also potentially from the coal that people were burning in their own homes. the main focus of that first chapter though really seems to be more about the language used around fog, so what people were calling fog in the 19th century. So fog, smoke, and then the combination of two, smog, which is perhaps more what we would call it now. And then other phrases that people used, like king fog, London particular, and pea soup or pea super fog. I actually find like learning about language really interesting. I really do love language and the evolution of language, and I do think that when you study language you can learn a lot about what life was or is like for people that are living it at the time. So I did find it really interesting when she mentioned about pea soup being yellow and the fogs being notoriously yellow in colour, and I did think, well hang on, but peas are green. I genuinely thought this when I was reading it, but they used to make pea soup from split peas, not fresh peas, so they were actually yellow and not green, and they did that because split peas were a lot cheaper and I guess they were easier to store, and so poor people would eat a lot of pea soup, and so it was a foodstuff that was, or a meal that was associated with poorer people, and then in that way the fogs then kind of had an association with the poor. And she also does mention that actually poorer areas were more likely to have worse fogs because they could be quite localised. It wasn't just the whole, across the whole of London all at one time. I thought that was quite an interesting point. She doesn't really expand on that in the rest of the book, unfortunately, which is a shame. I feel like I would have liked that to really be what the book was about, perhaps. Maybe that's what I wanted. Maybe I just wanted a history of Victorian London and not actually learn about fog. So I found that the looking at the language that was used by people at the time to be quite interesting. I think the problem is that if you write or speak about language, then the language that you use has to be very clear and it has to be very considered, just to make it understandable and to really get your point across. And after she does a chapter where she discusses all the different terminology that people would use, for the rest of the book she basically just calls it fog. And I guess this is done to keep things simple, so she's not using a lot of different terms, and also because most of the commentators at the time used the term fog. So the quotes that she fills the book with all reference the word fog. But to me it just ends up seeming like there's this conflation of fog and smoke and smog and pollution, and it's not super clear because the problem isn't really the fog, it was the pollution. So I wasn't super keen on that. The second chapter I did find more interesting and actually easier to get through, because there was a bit of this that was a bit of a chore to get through, to be honest. The second chapter is on Dickens, Charles Dickens the author, and his use of fog in some of his classic novels, which is quite interesting. However, she does retell the plot, the entire plot of these books, and basically just spoils the book for you if you were planning to read it, or if you thought it sounded interesting because of Dickens' use of fog, she's now ruined the ending for you. It's a little bit annoying. Throughout the book, in the subsequent chapters, there are also lots of references to other literature, other books and artworks that reference fog, and for each of the books she does give you like the whole plot essentially, which again spoils the plot of the book if you were interested in reading it, but also it just kind of ruins the flow of her book because you're having to like stop whatever point she's trying to make. She's having to stop to then go and give you like a condensed, somewhat condensed plot synopsis of someone else's book, and the books all started to blur together, to be honest, and I lost track of which one she was talking about. There was just too many references to other books and literature that could all have been contained into one chapter together alongside Dickens, to be honest. I mean, I kind of like that she gave Dickens his own chapter, but there could have just been one chapter for books and literature, and that would have probably made more sense. I did like that she talked about other artists, particularly painters, some of whom actually really liked and appreciated the fog and the different kind of light that you could see in the colours and the effects of it, and so some people even coming specifically to London to paint the fog, and that being the main focus of their work during that period at least. And I thought that was quite nice, just to show like a different side of things. Like some people actually appreciated the fog and its association with London, but there was just too many references to books, I think, and because it was spread throughout multiple chapters, again, it was hard to tell what each chapter was actually for. They weren't as clearly defined as they might be, I think. So the fogs were actually a lot worse than I realised. They were actually a lot thicker, and so it was really hard for people to see. So there was actually lots of accidents and incidents where people would get lost because they literally couldn't see more than a couple of feet in front of them, or even a couple of inches in front of them. People having accidents, traffic accidents, people getting hit by like carriages, I guess, at first, and a lot of breathing problems and a lot of deaths associated with the fogs, largely because of the problems with the breathing. So people with respiratory conditions were more likely to be affected. But also animals and plants were affected, both by the pollution in the air but also by the lack of sunlight that was able to get through on the foggy days. And so that it was interesting to learn just how bad they actually were, and Corton does a reasonably good job of explaining this and evidencing this with contemporary sources and quotes from people that were around at the time in the first chapter. And so I got that from the first chapter. I understood from the first chapter that people were dying. It was causing problems for people's breathing. Pollution is obviously not good for you. It was affecting animals and plants. There were accidents. Crime rates went up on foggy days because obviously it was harder to see what was happening. I got that from the first chapter. And then she says it again and again and again in all the subsequent chapters throughout the book. And there just seems like more and more quotes, and they get longer and longer. And honestly, I just started skipping them because they weren't really serving me. They were just repeating what we already knew, and again, breaking up the flow of her work, her text, her writing with just these like massive chunks of a quote from someone saying about how bad it was because he couldn't find his house in the fog. And it was just quite repetitive. And you could have cut out probably half the book if you'd just reduced, if you'd got rid of a lot of these quotes. They just weren't needed. They could have been used much more sparsely. So yeah, it's a bit repetitive, this book. I didn't fully understand what the point of it was. There wasn't really like an obvious kind of path through the book given by the construction of the chapters. And it's just a bit dull. I think it's just a bit boring. So, I mean, it is a book about fog, I know, but I was disappointed because I did think it would be a bit more interesting. It's taken me like 2.5 weeks to read this book, and it's really not that big. It's actually not even as big as it looks because a chunk of the back is just the bibliography and the notes and stuff. So it's only 332 pages, and it's taken me quite a while to read. Anyway. If you have read the book, let me know what you think in the comments. I'm not sure how well known it is or how popular it is, given the subject matter. My next book is a little bit thinner, and this is The Ice Palace. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the author's name just now. I might Google it and see how it's pronounced. So yeah, I'm hoping that this will be something, I mean, look at the cover. I'm hoping that this will be a bit more interesting, a bit better. Anyway, I just forgot how to speak English for a second there. Like I said, leave a comment or a like and subscribe for more of these book reviews. I'm going to try and do more reviews dedicated to one specific book, and try and do them a little bit less waffly. I don't know if this was successful or not. Let me know what you think in the comments about whether it was. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.